Hi. I'm going to take you for a very, very quick overview of hydration in children. Obviously, you're going to have lots of opinions, and I will try to go through the talk fairly quickly so that actually we can have more of a discussion, I think. If you're desperate to talk in between time, I really don't mind as long as the rest of the audience don't mind, because we're quite a nice size audience. So I just want to start with actually why do we need water? In utero, we're surrounded by water. And when babies are born, they are 70% water. That is because water promotes growth. Children and babies need lots of water to be able to grow. And I'm sure you're all familiar that children who don't get water actually become stunted to an extent. As you progress, the amount of water in the body proportionately goes down because growth slows down. Males, boys, men always have more water than women. That is because they have a higher percentage fat-free mass. And 73% of fat-free mass is water. And as we get older, we lose fat-free mass, so our total body water goes down. Interestingly, someone like, I don't know how many of you remember when we won the World Cup in rugby, good memories, a good few years ago. There was a big thing in the press saying our rugby team are all officially obese because they had high BMIs. Rubbish, obviously. You know, they just have extremely very good musculature. And that musculature is heavy and has a lot of fat-free mass, so they would have a very high percentage total body water. We need water for, obviously, to stay healthy, to stay fit. It is a major constituent of all tissues, apart from fat. I'm sure you all know fat and water don't mix. When I say fat, I don't mean adipose tissue. I mean purely fat. When we put on weight, we don't just put on fat, we also put on adipose tissue because that fat's contained in cells. And everything has to grow at the same time. But it's a major constituent of muscles. And we obviously need it for things like digestion and absorption. I'm sure you all know that if we don't have enough fluid, fibre can't work. You become constipated because the way that that works is to absorb water, to expand, to press against the bowel wall, to stimulate peristalsis, to eliminate feces. And obviously, it's a transport medium in the blood and in terms of excreting nitrogen products, urea, in the urine. One thing you may not know is it's actually in synovial fluid in the joints as well. So I think you can see it is implicit to our life and our health. Thermoregulation is one which is particularly important for children. We thermoregulate by sweat. That's one of our mechanisms. There are other mechanisms, but that's one of our mechanisms. And dogs don't sweat, so they pant. And so, you know, we all have different animals have adapted in different ways. But it's important that we are able to sweat to be able to thermoregulate. I think this is probably what will interest most people in the audience, is cognition in children. There isn't the evidence for this, unfortunately, for very good reasons. How do you actually dehydrate a child? It's unethical. It's unethical to do it actually in an adult. And what is done is you put adults under heat, stress, or exercise, which makes them dehydrate. And we have a lot of evidence from adults, young adults, particularly sort of, I think, as university students. They all want to earn a bit of money, so they volunteer to do these studies. And what they're showing is that people who are dehydrated to any extent, really, well, certainly, you know, coming down to 5% levels of dehydration, their memory, concentration, and attention span and arithmetic ability are reduced when they are dehydrated. But what about children? There is work in children. There's work in arid conditions, particularly by Bar David. But how do you separate out what is due to hydration and what is due to heat stress? There is a really nice study done in Wales, actually, which I think gives us a lot of hope for the future. what they have done is they have done memory tests in children, given them a drink of water. So these are children which, as far as they can tell, using the parameters that we have available, are what we would say euhydrated. Then given them 300 mils of tap water. And they've looked at their memory ability before and after, and they've done crossover, so it's quite a robust study. And what they've shown is that short and slightly longer-term memory is improved by giving a child a glass of water. And 300 mils is about the same size as a can of soft drinks. So it's not a tremendous amount. What we do have is we have a lot of evidence from adults. And as a mum, I was always very careful about making sure my children were well hydrated, because I think that evidence is becoming robust enough in adults, and we know that children are that more susceptible, that actually the evidence is gathering that actually we need to be looking at this more carefully and thinking about giving our children more water. But there are obstacles. What about in schools? I'll come on to some evidence in a minute. I'll show you a survey that we did. But a bit of work that I did with someone else in Ireland, we looked at teachers' perception of hydration. Generally, teachers were very ignorant about hydration, about water. But actually what was more concerning, I think, was their attitudes, that they didn't want water in the classroom. These are primary school teachers, because they saw it as a hindrance. They were worried about children going to the toilet more often and about spillages. So I think we have some work to do on that subject. But what is healthy hydration? It's about how much we get, and it's also about the type of beverages. We are very lucky in this country because generally we have very safe tap water. I'm sure none of you, every one of you who's seen those adverts for WaterAid have been moved by the plight of some people around the world. And I think we take it for granted, actually, that we are very lucky. But it's a balance between quality and quantity, and therefore the type of beverage that we have. And how much do we need? In the UK, we have no evidence-based recommendations. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the concept of recommended daily allowances, RDAs. Most of you? Some of you. Okay. If you're not, I would just quickly say they are devised by an expert panel, and they basically say we need this amount of vitamin C, vitamin D, etc., etc. We don't have any of that for water in this country. We have guidance from people like the Royal College of Nursing, the Food Standards Agency, Department of Health. There's nothing for children. We have big gaps, I think. We have big gaps in professional knowledge, and we have big gaps in our public education as well. EFSA, the European Food Safety Authority, get the name right, actually produced a scientific opinion in 2010. But how many of you have ever heard of it? Apart from you two. No one's ever heard of it. And I think you're not unusual. There is a lot of ignorance that there is actually a guidance. I'm not saying we have to follow Europe. Don't get me onto that subject. What I am saying is there's actually a really interesting piece of work there which has been done about adequate intakes of water. And we should really be looking at it. It's particularly important in children because, as I've said, they have higher body water. They need proportionately more. Now, that means that they may not drink as much, but per kilogram body weight they do. They have a much higher water turnover. They have a higher surface area per kilogram, which means that actually there's a bigger surface area for water to be lost through. And their systems aren't mature enough either at the moment. Their systems are still learning how to regulate water. They're learning how to thermoregulate. And younger children can't say, I'm thirsty, can I have a drink? I don't know, maybe some of you in the audience will be aware of it, but how many people actually, if a baby cries, the first thing you do is say, is it hungry? Does it need its nappy changed? Is it unwell? Maybe it just needs a cuddle. I don't think many mothers actually say, maybe it's thirsty. And actually, what we do know is breastfed babies are probably the best hydrated babies. Also, the hormone, first, water metabolism excretion, as Tam will tell you, because we had a tutorial on it, didn't we, Tam, is regulated by hormonal processes, Simon. And in children, that isn't fully developed. So in adults, it's an extremely efficient feedback mechanism. In children, it's damn good, but it's not quite there. So children are that more susceptible. This is the EFSA scientific opinion. And I think you can see, actually, what they have tried to do is to give recommendations for different ages. Once we get into prepubescence, they are beginning to differentiate between the two genders. And actually, they're also recommending increments for pregnant women and lactating women. If you're interested, that's the reference. But if you just Google FSA water adequate intake, you will find that reference. They base their recommendations on understanding hydration, understanding water losses, metabolism in the body, looking at energy intake, because water is produced in the body when we metabolize energy. And the other thing they looked at was intake data. They looked at intake data from 13 countries. And I know we're different around Europe, but Hungary had an intake of 620 mils, whereas Denmark's intake was over 2,600. Ours was about average, about 1,700. So I think they've done a fantastic job because they've taken what evidence there is, but there is still a lot of work to be done. This is an expert panel, the same as any other recommended daily allowance would be formulated by. So if you're not familiar with it, I do urge you to go and look at it. Interestingly, what they have said is, on average in the UK, well, in Europe rather, we get 80% of our water from beverages, but we get 20% from food. And that is something to always consider as well. But in the UK, it's not a particularly large amount. If you go to countries like China, it's 40 to 50%, because they drink a lot of soups, and they have much more liquid food than we do. So there's a difference there. Obviously, the type of beverage is important. What are children drinking? I'll show you what we have found that they're drinking. But on the face of it, you would say they're drinking water, milk, sugar-sweetened beverages, and I'm afraid we all know alcohol. You're probably saying, why the hell she put tea and coffee under sugar-sweetened beverages? I've done that because the National Diet and Nutrition Survey is the way that we find out what people in this country are taking. It was reanalyzed and published last year by NG, Sue Jay, Barry Popkins and people. And they actually classified tea and coffee as sugar-sweetened beverages because it has the potential to provide calories. If you're like me, I drink black tea with no sweetener, so that's a bit ambiguous, but that is why it's there. Honestly, there are lots of issues there, and I think we have confused the public as a profession because we have pushed 5 a day, and I was involved in 5 a day before it was 5 a day. There's pilot studies. And we've gone a long way, but we didn't say to people, actually, don't give your children lots of fruit juice. We didn't say to them, maybe just once a day, because actually there's a lot of sugar in it. And I do think that that's something which is now being regrouped and hopefully being addressed. We won't discuss alcohol. It was on the radio as I came here, and I'm sure you're all familiar with that. Only to say I was involved in a very large study in one of the home counties, and it was quite shocking what 11-year-olds were drinking. I'm the mum of a 20-year-old, so he's doing alcohol and psychology, in that order, I think, at university. And I won't tell you what age I think he started. In the UK, we, as I said, have the National Diet and Nutrition Survey, but it is primarily a diet survey. They acknowledge that it doesn't capture all drinking events. And this is the data which is used for EFSA. So what I'm saying is maybe EFSA is actually on the low side. So I'm going to quickly go through the study that we have done in this country. Over 400 children were involved across the age groups. We used a different methodology. We used a fluid diary. And outside of home, people were asked to keep little information cards, which they then went back and filled in their diaries. And we looked at drinking events, what was drunk, and how much. These are the results for the children. I think the first thing you can see is, actually, isn't there a lot of scatter? There's a great deal of variability in the amount that children drink. The yellow line is the EFSA value corrected just for beverages. And the numbers represent how many of those children aren't meeting the EFSA guidelines. And you can see, actually, it's the adolescents who have the biggest problem looking at that. Overall, if you look at the averages, there isn't a problem. But actually, I find that quite shocking, that 50% of 9 to 13-year-olds aren't drinking enough. If you look at when they drink, this is a bit confusing, but if you look at the green as opposed to the red, the green represents drinking during meals and red is outside. The bars just represent time periods. And you can see how it changes with age. At the bottom is how much is consumed outside meals. And actually, 7 to 10-year-olds are the ones which I worry about, because I think they are the ones who are relying on water provision in schools, a jug on the table. Well, God forbid those fountains. I hope they've improved since my children were at school, because I know my children hated them. What about the type of beverages consumed? There's a lot in the media about this at the moment, and our survey reinforced what everyone else has been saying, that actually, particularly our adolescents, they are consuming a lot of sugar-sweetened beverages and functional foods as well. Sugar-sweetened beverages are the red line, functional foods are the dark brown line, and very little water. There's a very big cultural thing here. In France, they consume more water and they consume more drinks during meal times than we do. Does it matter? We took a least case scenario looking at intakes by manufacturers, energy, nutrient contents and things. And on average, from 3 to 18, and that's very much a big age group, lots of variability in that, the average is about 175 calories a day. Does that matter? If you use various numbers, that actually equates to several kilograms over a year's period, if they don't compensate, and that's a big if. But some children are consuming a hell of a lot more than that, and obviously some aren't consuming any. I think my message is, like everyone else, that there is a lot of calories coming from these beverages. If we compare to the National Diet and Nutrition Survey, we've got different methodologies here, but we are capturing a lot more with this methodology. It's not a really fair comparison, but it's just to give you some idea that the middle one, is what is coming out now from the government compared with ours. And I think what it says to me is we need to look at our methodology. It's not just the UK, it's throughout Europe. And ILSI Europe, who are the International Life Science Institute, are now looking at that and trying to get a concerted approach to this topic. So in summary, the children in this country and their adolescents are consuming high amounts of sugar-sweetened beverages. And our survey, as I say, is reporting more. But actually, we don't promote water. I'm not advocating bottled water. I'm just saying water, tap water. We don't make that available in schools particularly. We don't make it appealing. So I'll stop before Tam shoots me, because I think we're about 5 minutes, aren't we, Tam?
Anytime you want.
So I'll stop there. I'm sorry it was quite a quick gallop through hydration in children. And if you have any questions, please ask. I'm sure Tam will be able to answer for you.